Alright, if everybody can open to page 54 in the textbooks, we will begin today's seminar on ramp in the red-white color pairing.
Professor Chain, please report to the Dean's office. Professor Chain, please report
Not
to the Dean's
again.
office.
I'm tenured. I don't have to deal with this sort of thing. Hello friends, this is Chain. Welcome you back to Chain of Commander, and it is time for the month of June's Patron's Choice Deck Tech. And for this month, I gave my patrons the choice of the new Lorehold Legendaries to see what they would want me to brew, and in their infinite wisdom, they asked that I make a list around Plargg, Dean of Chaos / Augusta, Dean of Order. Now before I get into this list, which I have to say, I'm pretty proud of myself, I will put a link to the list right there in the description for you to reference at your leisure, and if any of these cards seem like something you'd be willing to build with, definitely consider using that TCG Player affiliate link down there as well to purchase them. It won't cost you a single cent more, but it will help out the channel. Now, let's take a look at Plargg and Augusta here. It's one of those modal double-faced cards where the front is Plargg, Dean of Chaos, 1 in red for a 2/2 legendary creature or shaman with 2 activated abilities. The first one is tap and discard a card to draw a card. The second of which is pay 4 and a red, tap it. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary, non-land card with mana value. 3 or less, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then the other side there, Augusta, Dean of Order, is 2 and a white for a 1/3 legendary creature, human cleric. Other tapped creatures you control get +1/+0. Other untapped creatures you control get +0/+1. And whenever you attack, untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. So let's look at the Plargg side here. It's Plargg, not Plargg. Plargg is that weird cat thing from Miraculous Ladybug. Plargg is just general card filtering, a little bit of chaos in terms of card advantage when you don't know what you're going to get. Nothing on this side screams, build around me. In fact, it's quite difficult to really build around this side. But the other side, Augusta, this seems to be designed with fancy tap-untap combat shenanigans in mind. At least when it comes to those first 2 abilities, that last ability there. Whenever you attack, untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. That is the line that piqued my interest, and that is the line that I really started to build around. And you'll see what I'm talking about as this list goes on. I don't want to spoil too much up front here. And without further ado, let's begin this list where I begin all of my deck techs with the ramp. Alright, as far as our ramp is concerned, we have some classic mana rocks of the format in Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Mind Stone. But then we also have some cooler bits of mana rocks in the form of Dousing Dagger, which is actually an equipment that if the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, it flips over to Lotus Veil, which can add 3 mana of any color to our mana pool. And then MYR-Reservoir. I think you might start to see where this deck's going. MYR-Reservoir can add 2 colorless to our mana pool, but it can only be used to cast Mirror or activate abilities of Mirror. We also have things like Exuberant Firestoker. This is a red mana dork of all things that can also shock something if we have a big enough creature at our upkeep. Then we have a handful of just regular mana dorks here in Hedron Crawler, Mannequin, and Plague Mirror, all 3 of which can add colorless to a mana pool, and Plague Mirror also has Infect. And lastly, we have Palladium Mirror. This is a mirror that can add 2 colorless to our mana pool. But let's say we want to get some colored mana out of our dorks. Then we have things like Gold Mirror to add white mana, Iron Mirror to add red mana, and Alloy Mirror to add 1 mana of any color. Then we have a couple dudes that help us get some lands on the battlefield, get some land ramp in our Lorehold colors. We have Scaretiller, which could put a land into play when it gets untapped. And we also have Walking Atlas, which we can tap to put a land into play. And then lastly, we just have some generic cost reduction creatures here in Foundry Inspector, which makes all of our artifacts cost 1 less. And Joyrus Familiar, which makes all of our artifacts cost 1 less, as well as our legendaries, as well as our sagas. Now, spoiler alert, there's no sagas in this deck, so we're not going to use it for that. But the other 2 we'll be using plenty of. So we have a wide variety of ramp, primarily in mana dorks, and you'll see why a bit later here. But we'll have plenty of mana. What are we going to be doing to make sure we have things in hand to cast with it? As far as our card advantage is concerned, we're primarily looking for things that can be repeatable card advantage in this deck. So we have Lucio, Clockwork Scholar. This is one of the new cards from the Commander 21 product. It lets you draw a card whenever an artifact creature enters the battlefield under your control, though it only triggers once per turn. It also has the added benefit of preventing combat damage to all of your artifact creatures. Then we have Reckless Racer. Whenever Reckless Racer is tapped, you can loot a card. We have Mirror Retriever, which when it dies, lets you bring back an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. And lastly, we have Shimmer Mirror. Shimmer Mirror, not necessarily itself card advantage, but can change the pace of the game by giving all of our artifact spells flash. Now, we're keeping our hands full. Our opponents are doing their things. What do we have in store to help impede what our opponents are doing? Alright, as far as our removal is concerned, we have things like Intrepid Hero. This is a guy that when you tap him, will destroy any creature power 4 or greater. We have some more specific targeted removal, a little bit less conditional here in Dispatch, which will tap down a creature for a single white unless we have 3 or more artifacts, in which case you'll just straight up exile it. Path to Exile. This will exile for a single white in exchange for giving that creature's controller a basic to the battlefield tapped. And Source to Plowshares, which you can exile a creature in exchange for giving its controller life. Then we have a couple of board clears here just to make sure things don't get too out of hand. We have Austere Command. This is a very versatile board clear in this deck where it lets you choose any of the 2, whether it be destroying all big creatures, small creatures, artifacts, or enchantments. So we can choose specifically the 2 we're having issues with. Chain Reaction does damage to each creature equal to the amount of creatures on the battlefield. And Winds of Abandon, a personal favorite of mine. This is essentially the mono-white Cyclonic Rift where it will exile all of your opponent's creatures, leaving yours untouched, allowing you to swing in for a big attack. So we are attempting to remove our opponent's things. Obviously, they're going to be probably trying to attempt to remove ours. So what do we have in this deck to help protect ourselves? Alright, as far as our protection is concerned, we have some excellent pieces to help protect our board. We have the 2 Rune Sisters, Giver of Runes and Mother of Runes. Mother of Runes can be tapped to give any creature of ours pro color of our choice. Giver of Runes can be tapped to give any of our other creatures pro color or pro artifacts. Then we have Bronze Guardian. This is another new card out of the Commander 21 product. It gives all of our artifacts Ward 2, which means if our opponents want to target one of our artifacts, they have to pay an extra 2 or that spell gets countered. Then we have a couple ways to give our artifacts indestructible. We have Slowbad. Goblin Tinker allows us to sack a probably less impactful artifact at the time to give another one of our more important artifacts indestructible. Soul of New Forexia. This is an artifact creature that we could pump 5 mana into to give all of our permanents indestructible. Or if it's in the graveyard, we could pay 5 mana and exile it to do the same thing. And then lastly, we have Boros Charm. This one's a little bit more versatile, where it can either do 4 damage to any target, it can give one of our creatures double strike if we need it, but I see it more often than not being used for its last ability to give all of our permanents indestructible. So plenty of protection in this deck. But the question still remains, what are we trying to protect? Well, we're on the verge of answering that, but before I do ask if you've been enjoying this so far. If you end up liking this list, definitely consider hitting that like button below to show it. I would appreciate it greatly. And that said, let's just get into what this deck is all about. It's Mirror. It's always been Mirror. We have ways to make Mirror in Mirrorsmith, which lets us make Mirror whenever we cast an artifact. Master's Call, which makes 2 Mirror at instant speed. Genesis Chamber, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, its controller gets a Mirror token. We have Mirror Turbine, which can make Mirror, and then we can sack Mirror to tutor up more Mirror. Origin Spellbomb, which allows us to make a mirror and draw a card. Shrine of Loyal Legions. We can sack that thing to make mirrors equal to the amount of charge counters on it. Now we have Mirror Sire, which when it dies, it makes another mirror. And Mirror Propagator, which you can play 3 and tap it to just clone it, make a copy of it, have more Mirror Propagators that can propagate even more. Then we get on to more specialized Mirror here, and Mirror Enforcer. This one has affinity for artifacts, so if we have enough artifacts out there, it's essentially a free mirror. We have Perilous Mirror that when it dies, it can shock, so it can do 2 damage to any target. We have Mirror Welder. This has imprint on it, where we can slowly chew away at artifacts in the graveyard, and it gets all the activated abilities of any artifact that it exiled. And then we got the big mirror here. We got Lodestone Mirror, which we tap artifacts to make bigger. Mirror Galvanizer. This makes all of our mirror bigger, and then we can pay 1 and tap it to untap all of our other mirror. And then the classic Mirror Battle Sphere, the Battle Ball himself, which can swing in, and then we can tap untap mirror to both give it a buff and do direct damage to whatever it's attacking. So many mirror. How do we make sure we can kill with these mirror? So when it comes to actually killing people with mirror, we have a 2-step plan. 1, make the mirror really big. 2, make the mirror very fast. So in terms of making mirror big, we have things like Forsaken Monument, which not only gives a buff to all of our colorless creatures, but also doubles up on our colorless mana production, as well as gains us life whenever we cast a colorless spell. So this is just generic value all around. Chief of the Foundry, just a static ability to give all of our artifact creatures +1/+1. Mirror Matrix gives all of our mirrors +1/+1, and it can also pump mana into it to make more mirror. And then Steel Overseer, you can tap Steel Overseer to give all of your artifact creatures a +1/+1 counter. Then we have a couple of enchantments to kind of help with the same thing. We have Temper Seal, just a static ability to give all of our artifact creatures +2/+2, and Cathar's Crusade. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, we can put a +1/+1 counter on all of our other creatures. So things get pretty out of hand pretty quick. So we got Big Mirror, now we got to make them quick, and we got a bunch of things to help with that. Crashing Drawbridge, this is an artifact creature with Defender that we can tap to give all other creatures we control haste until end of turn. Thopter Engineer just has a static ability that gives all of our artifact creatures haste. Tuk Tuk Rebelfort, it doesn't even care about artifact creatures, it just gives all of our creatures haste all of the time. Hellbound Ancient Witness, this is another one from the Commander 21 product. It gives all of our stuff haste, and when attacking with artifact creatures, it does damage to and scries equal to the amount of tapped artifact creatures we control. So that can be used as direct damage, similar to Battle Ball, and it can be used to help filter through our deck. Very useful. And then lastly, we have First Day of Class. You may remember this particular card is my favorite common to come out of Strixhaven. If we cast this, every subsequent mirror, every subsequent creature that enters the battlefield under our control until end of turn not only gets haste, but also gets a +1/+1 counter. So this is doing both steps of the get big and swing fast game plan that we have provided for these mirror. Alright, let's say for some reason the mirror, they're just not cutting it. Something's not finishing the job here. We have a couple backup plans here, a couple other ways to help get that oomph through. We have Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. This is the flip Chandra from Origins. Once Chandra does 3 damage in a turn, she flips over to Chandra Roaring Flame, which can do even more damage every turn. Then we have Mikaeus the Lunarch. This is the white Steel Overseer that can put +1/+1 counters on all of our creatures, not just our artifact creatures. Reckless Fireweaver. We're going to have so many artifacts entering the battlefield each turn, and this does 1 damage to each opponent whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under our control. So a great way to get through without needing to do combat damage. And lastly, we have Throne of Geth. This allows us to sacrifice an artifact to proliferate, and we'll get a little bit more into that one shortly. Now, to finish up this list here, all we have to do is go over the mana base, and then we get to talk about all the cool things that this deck can do. But before we get there, I do ask if you've made it this far, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button below. I'd love to have folks join us going forward for deck techs like this and just other general chit-chat on the Commander format. That said, let's get through this mana base here and wrap it up with some strategy tips. Alright, as far as our mana base, we want to see artifacts entering the battlefield. So we are playing all 3 available artifact lands that we can in Ancient Den, Great Furnace, and Darksteel Citadel. We have all of our lands that produce both of our colors of mana in Battlefield Forge. Boros Garrison, that's the bounce land. Clifftop Retreat, that's the check land. Rugged Prairie, that's the filter land. Spire of Industry can only produce us colored mana if we control an artifact, but we probably will, to be honest. Needle Verge / Pillar Verge Pathway, that's the one that can be played for one or the other. Lorehold Campus, an ETB tapped land that we can pay for and tap to scry if we need to. Sunbaked Canyon, this is the one that we can sack to draw a card, and the classic Command Tower. Then we have our colored utility lands in Flagstones of Trocare, which if it leaves the battlefield, if it gets destroyed anyway, we can go get a plains on our deck. Castle Ardenvale, which makes us a 1/1 white human token. And Castle Embereth, which can give our entire team +1/+0 to give a little bit extra power there. Then we have our colorless utility lands. Field of Ruin lets us destroy a land that we're not a big fan of. Karn's Bastion, another proliferate tool in this deck. Rogue's Passage can give one of our big creatures unblockable so they can hit in for a little bit extra damage. Runes of Oron Reef, this will let us put a +1/+1 counter on a colorless creature that entered the battlefield under our control this turn. And Tomb of the Spirit Dragon, a nice little land here that will gain us life equal to the amount of colorless creatures we control, just to make sure we have that life gain in the deck. As far as our basics are concerned, we have an even split between 8 plains and 8 mountains, and that is a whole list of MYR. So why did I go this route? Well, because of Augusta's ability to allow us to untap and then tap things all willy-nilly during combat, there are a couple cool interactions that we can get out of it. For example, take the Chandra, the Flip Chandra. You need to do 3 damage with that Chandra to get it to flip. However, when you tap it, it only does 1 damage at a time, and you might be able to combine that with combat damage. But with Augusta, you can get 2 damage out of her from tapping, as well as combat damage, making her easier to flip. Then things like Steel Overseer and Mikaeus. These are ones that when they tap, they put +1/+1 counters on each creature. Suddenly you're getting 2 activations from them every turn, doubling up the amount of value you're getting out of those particular cards. Things like the Mana Dorks, the Rune Sisters, Intrepid Hero, any of our creatures with tap effects, the Reckless Racer, these now get double use every combat because we get to untap them and then tap them all again if we choose so. MYR Battle Sphere. This normally requires you to have MYR that you're not attacking with so that you can tap to pump it, but now you can swing with the Battle Ball and all of your MYR, use Augusta to untap all of your MYR, and then use those same MYR to then pump the Battle Ball and get the direct damage in, getting you double damage value from all of your MYR. Same thing with Alibao. This one you can use use the Augusta trigger first, make sure that resolves first, and then you have all your tapped artifacts allowing you to scry more and do more direct damage. Side note on this one, I do think Alibao would make for a pretty solid commander for this deck as well. Might even be better than Plargg, but did win the Patron poll, so just ignore that. And lastly, I think the real sneaky tech in this deck is the Plague Mirror. That's that Mana Dork that has Infect, because once you infect somebody, you can then proliferate with things like Throne of Geth and Karn's Bastion until they die from Infect. A legitimately possible kill in this deck. I love the way this particular deck plays with tap and untap shenanigans, and I love how MYR on the whole use tap and untap shenanigans. I think they play very well together, and I was very kind of excited when I found that wonderful synergy and got to design this deck around it. And at this point, I want to hear from you folks. I want to know if you folks have tried building Plargg and see which direction you have taken it in. I'd love to see, with these new commanders, all the different ways that people want to build them, because they all end up being so completely different and so completely unique. Definitely let me know in the comments below. But beyond that, thank you all very much for joining me today, and I'll see you guys again in the future.